What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another review, and this time we're taking a look at the Disney Plus series Moon Knight, the latest installment into the D Plus portion of the MCU. Let's waste no time. Let's get right into it. Let's talk about episode 1. All right, so overall thoughts on episode 1? I liked it. I think this is a overall really good start to a show that I think could be very, very interesting and very, very cool if Disney Plus doesn't F it up like they've done with the previous 4 shows before this one. Moon Knight is off to a good start. Moon Knight has the potential to be a Disney Plus version of The Punisher. And if this show can work in terms of its violence, then I think Daredevil and Punisher, when those shows eventually get made, they could take cues from this and it could work. I think so far from episode 1, it's off to a really good start. Like a really, really good start. But before I get into that, let's just talk about the broad basics first. Overall, like I said, I think the show is off to a really good start. I like Oscar Isaac in the lead role of Stephen Grant and Mark Spector. I think Oscar Isaac does a really good job thus far at portraying two different personalities as their own characters. He plays Stephen Grant as this mild-mannered British gift shipper dude who is, he's just very mundane, very ordinary, nothing special about him, kind of socially awkward in a lot of areas. But overall harmless. But he's prone to suffering blackouts, and we see after the first 15 minutes or so what happens when he has those blackouts. Like something like very vicious violence starts to happen. But while that happens, he has this voice within his head, pretty much saying, "Let Mark go, let Mark take over." And this mysterious voice is actually voiced by the great F. Murray Abraham. Now, eventually, we're gonna find out who this voice is, but but the mystery of what it is very interesting. Is very interesting to me, and I like how this mysterious voice knows the difference between Stephen and Mark, and I like how Stephen is completely just unaware that he has something within him that doesn't understand, and I like how they handle that in this and I like how they handle that so far in the episode. I like how when Stephen's in peril, he suffers from these blackouts, and when he comes back to reality, like bloody violence transpired, and he has no idea what's going on. A good example, he puts a collar around his ankle, he puts sand on his floor, he tapes up his apartment. We instantly think that there's something going on with this man. And when he wakes up in a mysterious village, he has no idea how he got there. He's being chased by guys with guns, and then he meets this mysterious man named Arthur Harrow, played by Ethan Hawke, who is looking for this mysterious scarab, as the Harrow character claims is a worshiper of an Egyptian goddess named Ammit. But when Harrow's men surround Grant, we think that he's in danger. Then all of a sudden he suffers a blackout, and then all of Harrow's men are dead, and are all dead in bloody ways. So like I said, this shows that they can push the envelope of violence to what you can do. And I think Moon Knight's gonna be a good prototype. And then you get this really, really fun chase on the highway with Harrow's men chasing down Grant, and during the chase he keeps going in and out of blackouts, and in which the Mark character inflicts unholy punishment on these people. So again, I like how the violence in the action sequences are handled in the show. I think the comedy so far is not over the top cringe. It works. It works so far, to me at least. I think Ethan Hawke as the character of Harrow, he can be very, very interesting, really interesting. I like how Ethan Hawke so far is playing him as like this cult leader, a la Charles Manson or David Koresh. I think if done right, Arthur Harrow could be one of the better Disney Plus villains. Here's hoping. But yeah, I'm liking what I'm seeing with the Moon Knight show. I like the overall aesthetic of the show. I like how it leans into Egyptian mythology, which always intrigued me as a child. And you can come up with some cool, monsters and villains for Moon Knight to fight, and some interesting puzzles for him to solve as he goes on his adventures. So the whole Egyptian aesthetic, that's a plus for me. Automatically sets it apart from other things in the MCU. And like I said, it can lead to some interesting action sequences, as it did at the end of this episode, where Arthur confronts Grant in the museum, and he wants to get the scarab, but then he unleashes this Egyptian monster, and and Mark, the other personality within Grant, pretty much has to persuade him to let him loose so that way he can take down the monster. And this is where we get our first revelation of Mark Spector, Moon Knight, and not gonna lie, looked pretty cool. It looks good on screen. You can get some interesting things out of this. So yeah, as the first episode, I enjoyed it. It worked for me. I'm very interested to see where it goes, and hopefully Disney doesn't F this up. I'm begging you. The last 4 shows you did, they started off decent, and then they slowly descended into madness where I just lost complete interest in it. But so far, Moon Knight has my attention. So yeah, let's keep it up. So yeah, overall, my thoughts on the first episode is good. Oh, side note, there's also this mysterious woman named Layla who has a connection to the character of Mark. Hopefully we get explanation as to who she is. So yeah, episode 1 review, episode 1 of Moon Knight, solid. Did a good job at establishing the world. All right, let's talk about episode 2 of Moon Knight. All right, so episode 2 picks up where episode 1 left off, which was Stephen giving into the Mark Spector side of his personality and becoming Moon Knight, therefore saving his life. Now this episode picks up directly after that one leaves off. I gotta say, as a whole, episode 2 is not as good as episode 1. I think this episode is kind of dull, to be honest with you. Can get kind of drags in a lot of areas, but once you get to like the last, 20 minutes, then it starts to pick up a little bit. Overall, I don't think episode 2 was remote. I don't think episode 2 was unwatchable. I just found it to be a little bit boring. Mainly because now it's time to set up all the supporting players and stuff like that. This particular episode has a lot of talking. A lot of people just talking. The performances are good, but it's just a lot of talking. And take a cue out of Terminator. Have your talking being done while action sequences are going on, so that way we're not bored. Because I found episode 2 to be, kind of boring in a lot of areas. And honestly, truthfully, I don't really feel that episode 2 did enough work to cover the ground of what this show is aiming for, to be honest with you. But let's just try and get everything out of the way. So episode 2 picks up where episode 1 left off. Stephen Grant, he's losing his job from the museum as for what happened in episode 1. And now we get introduced to the character of Layla, who we discover is the wife of Mark Spector, who is the other personality within Stephen's body. I have to say, once again, Oscar Isaacs does a really good job at playing the characters of Stephen Grant and Mark Spector as these two conflicting personalities in the same body. We actually find out more about the Mark character. We find out that he's an American mercenary. We find out that he's the avatar of the Egyptian god Khonshu, who is voiced by F. Murray Abraham. I have to say, from between episodes 1 and 2, I like F. Murray Abraham as the voice of Khonshu. I like the personality he's given. I think Murray gives the character a very foreboding resonance with his voice. And I like how he has like the personality of a 2-year-old. Like when he doesn't get his way, he'll throw temper tantrums and be like, "Oh no, I can't be with you." Blah. No, it's kind of like it's Venom done right, so to speak. Like Tom Hardy's Venom should have been more like the relationship between Khonshu and Grant. Something similar to that, where it's not really played up for jokes, but you also get it. But it does. You do have a dark sense of humor here and there, but it's mostly played somewhat straight. If Venom would have taken some cues from this, then I think the relationship between Brock and the Venom symbiote would have been much, much better. That's just me personally. But in terms of what this show has to offer, I like it. Oscar Isaacs is a champion of this show. He is the major highlight. How we can flip-flop between two different characters and give them different mannerisms is really, really, really fun to see. And it really shows that he's a very underrated actor when it comes to that sort of thing. The actress who plays Layla, she's fine. There's nothing really all that to her performance, to be honest with you. She's just there. She's just basically the wife of Mark. And they're on this adventure to try and find this scarab, which is hidden in the storage unit, which eventually Mark will lose to Arthur Harrow near the end of the episode. But yeah, the whole thing is just, Mark and Layla trying to find the scarab. They go to Mark's apartment. Then he gets captured by these two cops working for Haro. Then they have this conversation about the gods of Met and Khonshu, and it's revealed that Haro was once an avatar for Khonshu, but they didn't really see eye to eye on certain things. Once again, I enjoyed Ethan Hawke's performance as the character of Arthur Harrow. I think he's giving him a lot of personality. I would just like to know what Harrow's endgame is, because why does he want this? What is so special about this scarab? So far, they haven't really been told what is so special about this scarab and why Arthur Harrow wants it so much, and why Mark has to pretty much sacrifice his life in instances to retain it. But yeah, the conversation scene is okay. Drags on a little too long, but the chemistry between Ethan Hawke and Oscar Isaacs is interesting to see, and getting some backstory on Haro and his connection to Khonshu is actually nice. Is also nice as well. Yeah, so we get through that. We get to a big action fight scene where this jackal starts to attack Layla and Grant transforms into Mr. Knight, which is basically Moon Knight only in a suit, but with Stephen Grant's personality being retained. He gets washed, and then near the end of the episode, he gives in to Mark, who goes into full Knight regalia, and we get a lot of cool comic book-esque splash page shots during this chase between Moon Knight and the Jackal. I kind of liked how it looked. I really liked how it looked. I think the last 10 minutes of this episode is actually a lot of fun. That's just me personally. I had fun watching the last 10 minutes of this episode. I think the rest of it was a little bit slow. Kind of got dull in a lot of areas where it's just like doing a lot of talking and not enough actioning. But yeah, the last 10 to 15 minutes is where the episode finally picked up, when the fight sequence happens, and it was entertaining. And I like seeing Oscar Isaac go back and forth as Stephen Grant and Mark Spector, and Stephen being reluctant to give Mark total control since Mark is more brutal. But eventually he does, and the Jackal's defeated, and Arthur Harrow now has the scarab. It's also revealed that Khonshu is just using Mark, and he's looking for a replacement, and the replacement that Khonshu wants is Layla. The MCU always got to do those MCU things, because God forbid, we can just focus on the real Moon Knight. Instead, we gotta have the MCU nonsense get peppered in here in this show. It's always that tease. I hate it. I can't stand it. The show is called Moon Knight with Mark Spector and Stephen Grant, not Moon Girl. Please, enough. I know it's just a tease, and Khonshu's just using it as a way to manipulate Spector into doing what he wants. I get it. No, we see, and eventually we see Mark being transported or waking up in Cairo, and we go from there when episode 3 drops. So yeah, those are my quick thoughts on episode 2 of Moon Knight. Overall, not as good as episode 1. I think it's kind of weak so far. It's nothing horrible or horrendous. It does take a while to pick up, but like I said, once Oscar Isaac and Arthur Harrow have their conversation, and from there, I think it picks up, and the last 20 minutes is actually pretty enjoyable. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Check it back next time for more. All right, let's talk about episode 3 of Moon Knight. Honestly, truthfully, I thought episode 3 was kind of dull. I don't really think that episode 3 accomplished all that much, aside from maybe a few things. Other than that, I thought this episode was really drawn out, kind of slow, and incredibly just uninteresting. The 3 major highlights to take away from episode 3 are as follows. We are introduced to this character named Anton Mogart, who is an antique dealer and an old acquaintance of the character of Layla. The reason why Layla and Mark Spector have to go to Anton Mogart is because he has in his possession an ancient artifact that can help them find the tomb of Amet. And this ancient artifact is a map that was once in the possession of a former Magi. So once they get this map, they have to then use this location to find a sarcophagus that can lead them to Amet's tomb. Yeah, that's pretty much Anton Mogart's inclusion in this into this show, and as a character. It's just as a plot device. Nothing really. He doesn't really do anything. He has a brief moment where he gets into a fight, and then the show seemingly just injures him, and then he literally just runs off on his horse. I would say this: the late Gaspard Ulliel, his performance as Mogart was, decent. No, he does give him a suave, sophisticated personality. I think he could have used much more screen time, to be honest with you. I'm not sure if his character was reshot. I'm not sure if the show had last minute reshoots in the couple months prior to the show's release, given that Gaspard Ulliel had passed away this January. Like I said, his performance in the episode was fine. Nothing really to write home about. Like I said, he does give a level of sophistication and some suaveness to it. But yeah, if the Anton character does come back for the next 3 episodes, then maybe just this could have been Ulliel's breakthrough performance, and then it would make his death even more of a shame. But for what we got in this episode, fine. Nothing really to write home about, but it was good for what it was. Once again, Oscar Isaacs, he shines as Stephen Grant and Mark Spector. Like, everything else around him could be dull and boring, but at least his performance is good. Like, he's really carrying. Like, Oscar Isaacs, to me, is really carrying in this show, and you could tell this man is truly giving it his all. The same thing with Ethan Hawke. I know Ethan Hawke, he's an acquired taste to a lot of people, but I like his performance in this show. I just think his villain character is just not really clicking with me as the way it should, because I like the whole idea of him being this cult leader, but he just comes across as he's starting to come across as just a very boring, generic villain who wants to unleash evil to take over the world. Like, his end game is really approaching the typical end game of any other villain. I want to take over the world. Ha ha ha. Not really interesting me. It's really starting to get dull. The stuff with Khonshu, I kind of sort of think it's slightly interesting about him being banished by the gods, and then at the end of the episode, he has to do a thing where he turns back the stars 2,000 years in the past, so that way the map can line up and it can help Layla and Mark have the current location of the sarcophagus that he has to find. I mean, by doing this, Khonshu breaks the rules, and now he's imprisoned by the Egyptian gods. So that stuff is slightly interesting to me, and I think if the show is smart enough, hopefully they can expand upon it within the next 3 episodes, so that we can see what's happening. So we can get some closure on that. Interesting. It's slightly interesting to me, at least. The opening couple of minutes of the show I thought was okay. I like the thing of Cairo and seeing the pyramids of Giza. I like the landscape shots and the exotic location. But like I said, this show is starting to really dip into the territory of its location and shots, and the story is starting to just become the story for Moon Knight is starting to feel like Indiana Jones, only not a good Indiana Jones. It's like this show doesn't have the sense of fun or artistic style as the Indiana Jones movies, which is a shame, because Moon Knight could have been a pretty good Marvel-esque Indiana Jones type of adventure with a darker tone to it. Like Moon Knight, compared to Moon Knight does have a dark tone to it, but it also has a lot of that Marvel humor that undercuts a lot of tension, and that's very prevalent in this big fight with Moon Knight and Anton Mogart's men, where Steven transforms into Mr. Knight and then does forced comedy in the middle of a bloody fight. Like, I hate that stuff. I didn't like the Marvel humor when they first started doing it, and I don't like it now. It undercuts so much tension and so cringe. I hate it. I hate the Marvel humor. What else happened in this episode? Like I said, not really a whole lot happens in episode 3. Just a couple of things to take away from it. Like I said, Khonshu gets imprisoned after he turns back the stars. Anton Mogart is basically used as a plot device for Layla and Mark to get this map as a way to find a sarcophagus for the goddess Amet, and to prove to the gods that Horo is using Amet for sinister ways. But the God Council refuses to believe them. That's pretty much it. That's the biggest takeaway I can give from episode 3. Nothing really all that fancy. Honestly, truthfully, episodes 2 and 3 to me have been the weakest ones so far, where very little happens, and it's starting to, and episode 3 is where the show is to really start to pick up steam, and it feels like it's just biding its time for some reason. Almost as if they're stretching a very flimsy story into a 6-episode show when it could have been done in a 2-hour affair a la Hawkeye. But yeah, those are my thoughts on episode 3. Mediocre, nothing offensively bad, but nothing really all that interesting. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Check it back for episode 4. Okay, episode 4 highlights are as follows. Layla and Steven have entered the tomb of Ammit as they're in search for her sarcophagus. They do a little cave diving, very reminiscent of Indiana Jones and the Brendan Fraser mummy movies. I got no problems with that because I enjoy both those franchises and I like seeing the show pay homage to both those franchises. So, yeah, they do their cave diving, their exploration. They find a bunch of tombs. Grant finds the ancient tomb of Alexander the Great, which has since been lost. They run across these mummies that are disemboweling guy and putting his organs in Egyptian jars. They fight them a little bit. Then Mark takes over and he and Layla have a conversation. Basically, is as this: Steven and Layla are falling for one another. Mark gets a little bit jealous that Steven is making moves on his wife, and Steven admits to Layla that the reason why Mark is pushing her away is because Khonshu wants to make her his new avatar. But on top of all that, Mark reveals that he was there the night that Layla's father was killed because he was killed along with them until being revived by Khonshu. And this starts to begin a little bit of a split between Mark and Layla, since he kept this a big secret. But nothing really further comes with it because Haro appears, he starts attacking them all, and then he shoots and kills Steven/Mark at point blank range. And then this leads to the last couple of minutes of the episode where Mark is now in a psych ward. He's been split from Steven, who is now his own separate body. Layla is also in this psych ward. We see Arthur, who went from being a cult leader to now a psychiatrist. So this whole thing, remaining 10 to 15 minutes of the episode 4, gave me flashes of an episode of Ash vs. the Evil Dead in season 2, where Ash goes to a psych ward because the demon he's hunting pretty much convinces him that everything that he's actually really crazy and that there is no supernatural force into him. That's the vibe I got with the last few minutes of episode 4. It brought me back to that season 2 story arc of Ash being in a psych ward and pretty much being brainwashed into believing that he's actually really crazy and that there's no demons after him. But yeah, Mark eventually breaks free from the shackles of a wheelchair, finds out that he and Steven have not been split personalities. They run into a talking hippopotamus, and the show just ends. So yeah, those are the season 4 highlights. Those are the episode 4 highlights. I'm just gonna say this: when compared to episodes 2 and 3, I like episode 4 a little bit better. But my main gripe with Moon Knight is that, to me, this show never feels like it's getting out of its first gear and entering a second gear. It just feels like it's spinning its wheels. Like nothing really all that interesting is happening. Nothing happening really at all. I don't know what this show is building to. I don't know what this show's endgame is. Hopefully it leads to something that's remotely interesting. I've been hearing rumors about Apocalypse, and I'm just like, yeah, no. Why would you want to put Apocalypse in this? It makes no sense. Apocalypse is like a be-all, end-all villain. Him having a cameo in Moon Knight makes absolutely zero sense. So I hope that's not the case at all. Will it lead to something else? I have no idea. But like I said, to me, Moon Knight just never feels like it's getting out of its second gear. Every time it shows flashes of finally doing something chaotic, it reels itself back in and becomes tame again. Like, this show is very inconsistent as to what it wants to be. This show either wants to be this brutal action movie or just wants to be this, adventure serial. Like, it doesn't know how to gel the two, and that's why, to me, it feels like it's never getting out of its first or second gear. It just feels like it's spinning its wheels. But yeah, other than that, I thought episode 4 was okay. Nothing offensively bad, but nothing all that remotely interesting, with the exception of the last 10 to 15 minutes, but that's pretty much it. So yeah, those are my thoughts on episode 4. Okay, episode 5 of Moon Knight. Let's briefly go over the penultimate episode of this show. So basically, it picks up where the last episode left off. Mark and Steven are confronted by this talking hippopotamus, who is actually an Egyptian goddess, and she pretty much takes them on a tour through their history and childhood. It's ultimately revealed that Mark Spector is the dominant personality, and he only created the character of Steven since his mother was very, very abusive towards him. This abuse of Mark came from the fact that when Mark was a kid, he had a brother named Randall. They went into a cave, and Randall accidentally drowned and died. And since then, his mother pretty much abused and beat him to death. As a way to cope with this, this is how Mark created the alternate personality of Steven as a way to have a more balanced and normal life. It's also revealed that their real mother had died, and the Steven personality of himself just created the illusion of having a mother who's actually still alive. So yeah, that's really the biggest of all the takeaways in episode 5. And of course the episode itself is pretty much Steven and Mark trying to balance each other's out, since they're on this big boat sailing through the Egyptian afterlife. And according to the scales of justice that the hippopotamus is weighing their hearts on, they have to be copacetic with one another if they are to survive the ordeal that they're currently in. So yeah, like the biggest takeaways of episode 5 is getting to know the history more of Mark and what he went through and stuff like that. Now listen, is that cool for an origin story? Yes. Why does it have to happen in episode 5 when you should really be gearing to the final episode? I don't know. I mean, that's becoming the thing with these Marvel shows. They wait to the absolute last minute to do this giant exposition dump on you. This could have been a perfect episode 3 instead of an episode 5 where we should really be gearing towards the end of the show, and episode 5 should have been Mark finding his way out of the asylum and preparing for that final battle with Haro. Instead, it's just him and Steven wandering through the Egyptian afterlife, just talking. This episode is the definition of more talk than anything else. Again, the only thing that's keeping this show together are the performances, because from an overall story standpoint, I'm not going to lie, Moon Knight started off really, really promising, but this show has just gotten really, really just dull and boring as it continues to progress. There's nothing really all that fascinating about Moon Knight. I'll say this. When compared to the other shows thus far, I think Moon Knight is slightly better, but at this point, it's not really saying much. Hopefully, the season finales can somewhat save this thing, but I highly doubt it, because these Disney Plus shows are known for having very, very lackluster season finales that overall do absolutely nothing for me in the long run. So, who knows? Like, who legitimately knows? All I know is that episode 5 is just a exposition dump episode, and we get an origin story at the tail end of a show where the origin story should have came in 3 episodes in, not 5 episodes in. And like I said, nothing really all that of substance matters. You know, again, we see Mark's history. While all that's happening, these unwanted spirits who have been unfairly judged are attacking this boat that they're sailing through the afterlife in a last-ditch effort to try and save each other. Steven sacrifices himself and eventually dies. It looks like he dies, and now Mark is just the dominant. Mark, who is the dominant personality, is now in the Egyptian fields of Reed as he searches his way back. Yeah, that's episode 5. Don't really have nothing more to say. Those are my thoughts. Hopefully, episode 6 can wrap this show up in a decent way. Also, in episode 5 of this show, we get to see how Khonshu chose Mark to be his avatar. That whole scene is actually not that bad. I actually enjoyed it. It had a nice creep factor to it. But afterwards, it strongly hinted that that Layla is going to be getting Khonshu as her avatar as a way to save Mark from his predicament. Mark Spector just debuted in the MCU, and now he's going to be MCU'd. Awesome. Okay, we have reached episode 6 of Moon Knight, the season finale of what has been a very just disappointing show. Moon Knight is a show that, now that I've seen it from episode 1 to 6, it started off very promising and then divulged, like all these Disney Plus shows, into something just very boring and lackluster with really... It's a show that pretends to be interesting, and the critics will eat it up because it's MCU, but the fans who are starting to really look behind Disney's BS and Marvel Studios' BS are beginning to finally see that, yeah, these shows are just being made for the sake of being made. Because Moon Knight, when you watch it as a whole, it's a very confusing, lackluster show where half the time I have no idea what's happening, nor do I care to want to do an episode rewatch to refresh my memory on what's happening, because I just don't care. After watching this entire show, I don't get the purpose of Moon Knight. Why did this show have to exist? Given the story that this show is told, it's like Hawkeye. You could have told this story in a 2-hour movie and nothing really would have gotten lost in translation. It would have been actually quite better as a 2-hour movie. Cut out a lot of the boring filler, actually have some more action sequences, and Moon Knight could have been actually a pretty cool movie. Instead, it's a very lackluster, boring show that pretends to have these grand scale stakes, but in actuality, it doesn't really have that much going for it. Yeah, the season finale for this show was very lackluster. Basically, Layla makes a deal with the Hippo Queen to try and find Mark Spector's body, which she eventually does. Khonshu then invades the body, resurrecting him. Also, Steven gets resurrected after his apparent death in the last episode. The goddess Ammit binds herself to Horo, and we get, CGI battle between Ammit and Khonshu. And we also get a battle with Layla, who is now the avatar of many gods, giving her Wonder Woman a Wonder Woman-like appearance. Her and Spector, who is and Grant, who switch back and forth between Moon Knight and Mr. Knight, take on Horo in a handicap match. Mark has a blackout in which we see the end of the battle where he beats the shit out of Horo. Why couldn't we see this in full scale? I don't know. I think it's kind of boring that we actually didn't get to see Moon Knight and Horo have this real big drag down fight. We get the beginnings of it, but we don't get the middle nor the end of it, which sucked. Ultimately, this leads to Spector and Grant going back into the imaginary asylum where they reject it when they find out that the psychiatrist is leaving blood prints because Horo is known for having glass in his sandals. They wake up, bind in the apartment to a chain. That's how the ultimate show ends. It's just big action filler with nothing really happening. Then we get to the post-credit scenes where we see Horo in a real asylum, bound to a chair, where he's being wheeled out by this mystery man. He gets into a limo. He sees Khonshu. They have a talk. Khonshu reveals that he was never after Mark Spector's wife. That he actually had something else in mind. Now that Spector and Grant are no longer in service to Khonshu, he found another one of Mark's hidden personalities, a cab driver named John Locke Lee, and it's revealed that John Locke Lee is the mystery man who wheeled Horo into a limo and then shoots him dead. So yeah, basically the season finale just sets up the third personality of Mark Spector being that of John Locke Lee, the cab driver, who is now bound by Khonshu. So yeah, that's really all that happened in the season finale of Moon Knight. Nothing really all that spectacular. So yeah, now that I've seen this thing from episodes 1 to 6, I can say that Moon Knight, I like it better than WandaVision, than Falcon and Winter Soldier, than Hawkeye and WandaVision, but it's not really saying much. I mean, this show didn't fully go down the MCU route, but at the same time, this show is not really going to be remembered for anything spectacular. Moon Knight is a show that should have really pushed the boundaries of violence. Instead, it just went for more jokey, comedic stuff, and it pretended to have the over-the-top violence that it promised, but we didn't really get. Moon Knight to me didn't feel like a brutal action hero, Kevin Feige. He felt more like a comedian. The show had flashes of dark violence, but it always pulled its punches. I mean, if you were going to save the dark and brutal stuff until the season finale, then yes, show it, but we didn't even get that. We were kind of robbed of that, and we got just a generic CG spectacle that we're known for getting in these D+ shows for the last year and a half. So yeah, when all said and done, I'm just going to give Moon Knight a solid 6 out of 10. I liked it better than the ones that came before it, but even that's not enough. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the entire Moon Knight series. Let me know yours in the comment section down below. Like the video and subscribe. I'll check you back next time for more.